Welcome to Words That Matter, a modern-day book club. I'm Lee Smith, your host. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm smiling. I'm so happy to introduce our guest today, J. Michael Waller, who has an extraordinary story to tell in his new book, and I'm going to get him to tell it in his new book. First of all, I should say that Dr. J. Michael Waller, he's an expert in an expert in propaganda, all the different things that you hear people boasting about when they talk about disinformation and misinformation, all these fraudulent things that are actually just rationale for censorship, for censoring Americans' opinions that they don't like. Mike has worked on this for decades. He was a Cold Warrior, among other things, and Mike has seen how our intelligence agencies have gotten rotten, and that's the subject of his new book, which is called Big Intel: How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains. Welcome, J. Michael Waller. Mike, thanks so much for being here with us today, and congratulations on your book, which is just published. Congrats. I want to know more about your story. The book starts with a fascinating story. You're a college student. You're a conservative. You're in the middle of the Cold War. America's in the middle of the Cold War, and you want to contribute. So if you could pick it up from there and tell us this is how your career starts with the Cold War, with your struggle, with the country's struggle, with the free world struggle against communism.
Well, yeah, it started as a college freshman when Jimmy Carter was president, and it was Reagan's election was freshman, first semester at George Washington University. So it was a really exciting time. And our dorm was 3 blocks from the White House. So we got to be in the middle of all this. And as a Senate intern, a nobody kid running around in the Senate, you get to meet a lot of people and go to a lot of events. And I just fell into it because I wanted to help President Reagan in his declared fight to roll back Soviet communism.
How did you understand it at the time? I mean, you were a college student, lots of college students. This is not necessarily why young people go to college in America, that they've ever gone to college in order to fight for freedom. It's great that you did it. But it's a rare thing. Most people go to college, sometimes to get a career, sometimes to find a mate, sometimes just to get away from family. So, but you as a college student did something else. How? What did you know beforehand, before you got to college, and said, this is the fight, I've got to be involved, I've got to get there?
Well, I grew up in New Hampshire, and in the mid to late 70s, they were building a nuclear power plant in the state, and I got involved in the anti-nuclear energy movement because I was concerned about the environment. And then, so they had professional agitators come in from California and peel some of us more active kids aside and to train us. And then I was put in a struggle session, and I was isolated, and they were asking me questions. Why do you want to do this? And I said, well, because I don't want this boiling water to be pumped out from the reactor to sea. It's going to kill all the fish beds. And they laughed at me and said, this is not about the environment. This is to overthrow American capitalism.
Wow.
So at age 15, I realized these guys are a bunch of communists.
Wow.
I'm a dupe. I'm being dragged into something. And at the same time, also, not far away, across the river in Vermont, was this eccentric Russian fellow who lived there, who was very famous and had a new book out. His name was Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Wow.
So I had one high school teacher who was getting me involved in communist activity, and another high school teacher who introduced me to Solzhenitsyn's writings at the same time. And I'm like, whoa, there's something here. And then, of course, Reagan runs for president, and he has this message, and it all just sort of fit together.
Did you ever get to meet Solzhenitsyn?
No, no, he was reclusive. He didn't really meet anybody.
Right. Yeah.
We invited him to speak at our school, but he wouldn't.
So then you get to college, and then you. In the story that you tell, I'm not giving everything away. I mean, it's part of your biography. But you're interested in joining the CIA. You wanted to join the CIA. You spoke with different people on the Hill. You spoke with different people at school. So if you can elaborate on that story too.
Yeah, well, again, you're a kid and Reagan's your president, and I was working for a very conservative senator at the time who shared that mission and got to meet a lot of people who were around Reagan, and they weren't like so snobby that they wouldn't pay attention to some, then skinny young kid with big hair, So they were actually um, were trying to get younger people involved. So I was very fortunate in that regard. And lo and behold, I thought, well, Bill Casey, the old OSS guy, Reagan's campaign manager, he's CIA director, he's leading this fight. I want to join it. And I thought also, well, maybe join the Army also, Army ROTC. They had a program at Georgetown, and I thought this is just being run by a depressed colonel from Vietnam War. There's Army's not doing anything. So I had a chance through the White House outreach office to go out with the Contras as a student journalist and got my military training down there as an insurgent.
Okay, hold on a second. Now, that you definitely have to explain. What do you mean you got your military? So you chose not to do Army ROTC at Georgetown. Instead, you got your military training from the Contras. So please,
Right.
please elaborate how that happened and what that was like.
Well, this was a time when you had student journalism was a big thing for conservatives at the time, and you had places like the Dartmouth Review, started by Dinesh D'Souza, and other papers like that at campuses across the country. We started one at GW, but we weren't out there to inform. We were more out there to just troll and attack leftists and so forth. But it was still student journalism, and I thought I wanted to get into messaging somehow and getting into journalism. So the White House outreach people said, well, I'll backstep a little bit. We had a Young Americans for Freedom chapter at GW, and they invited somebody from Soldier Fortune magazine to come speak. Yap was always trying to provoke the left and get some really good, hardcore speakers. So so I met him, and he said, "Oh yeah, come on to Afghanistan with me." This is at the time of the Soviet occupation, and we were going to go out with Ahmad Shah Massoud of the Northern Alliance, and so he said, "Yeah, come out with us." So it was all very exciting, and I'd mentioned this to some folks at the White House who were sort of looking after me because of my activism, and one of them, Faith Whittlesey, said, "You don't want to do that. You speak Spanish. Why don't you go down to Central America? We can set this up." So lo and behold, that's how it was set up as a student journalist. Then the Washington Times ran a 3-part series. Here I am, just an undergrad in college, so it was all very exciting. But while you're down there, you think, "Hey, can I learn how to fire an AK? Can I learn, how does a belt-fed machine gun work? Can I go through your training?" And they said, "Yeah, sure." So went and did that.
Did you wind up fighting alongside them as well as your journalism?
We got into uh, we, some self-defense issues. So I didn't set out to do anything, but if you're being attacked by communists, you've got to, do whatever little training you have to defend yourself.
So I want to come back for a second when you were talking about journalism. This is something that I've noticed because on the right, Epoch Times is actually is kind of extraordinary in that way, as is Washington Times as well. But a lot of the conservative movement right now seems less interested in journalism as such, investigative journalism, and much more interested in commentary. How did that happen? How did young people now, young conservatives, young people on the right, when they leave school and they want to do something on the right, they're much more interested in commenting and having. Did this start with the universe of blogging, or am I missing something, that there actually is a vibrant conservative, and there's a vibrant conservative media, but a lot of it doesn't seem to have much to do with investigative reporting anymore.
Right. And it's really unfortunate because we're not taken seriously by people we could otherwise persuade if we're simply commenting and opining about things. That's easy to do. Anybody can comment. The hard part is investigating or doing real reporting from on site. And you do have some really great conservatives who are doing that kind of reporting on site. But where we run short is solid investigative work, in literary work, in cultural kind of work. This is where a lot of people we know are really making a contribution in that regard, but we still have a long way to go. if you look at even some of the left-wing investigative reporting, places like Rolling Stone, even Mother Jones, it's really first-rate reporting. And some of it is such where if you didn't know the medium where it was coming from and you just read the article, you'd think, wow, this is great reporting. I might not agree with it all, but it's still fine reporting. So conservatives have yet to master that.
Right. You're talking about Mother Jones and other left wing magazines. I think that was one of the more surprising things about RussiaGate, that a lot of these places that had been esteemed as, their investigative teams. I mean, they all seem to have gone crazy during that moment. So I know I'm throwing a whole bunch of different things at you, but insofar as you are both a writer, you've contributed to a number of different publications, and and you've worked you've worked abroad. You've worked, if not with, certainly side by side, senior figures from the U.S. intelligence community. And have you been surprised, because this is really what big intel is about, I think, in lots of ways, or the stories that it tells, about how the media and how the intelligence services have kind of intersected in strange ways. Is this something that's, has it always been the case, or do you think that this is something new that we're seeing? Again, I'm thinking in particular about Mother Jones and David Korn and some of the reporting that he did on Christopher
David
Steele.
Korn.
All right. I mean,
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think a lot of, maybe you weren't surprised. Maybe you probably know a lot more about his background than I do.
Well, I remember him back in the Reagan years where he was just echoing whatever Soviet propagandists were saying. So I stopped following him and can't even comment on anything more recent because I just remember him as essentially a Soviet propagandist. What we've had, though, throughout our history is the CIA has always tried to influence the American news media, even though it's against it's against the law for the CIA to be influencing the American public domestically. If you investigate, or if you rather influence foreign audiences, that's part of the CIA's duty. The problem then is blowback to have foreign news sources come back to America. But what we've had since the 1950s is the CIA leaking to the news media here and building the careers of big journalists, mainly liberal journalists, with illegal leaks of classified information. You also have it to a similar, not as a large of a degree, but still similarly with the FBI, leaking to their favorite journalists. They write books, they get on the bestseller list. You get retired FBI people or CIA people and senior anonymous current ones endorsing the book and the products and saying, yes, this is a good writer. And so building the careers of these people who then become completely dependent on our intelligence community for their careers.
Is this part of how, I want to get into big intel now. Is this partly how these services, the FBI and CIA, have changed? You said it's been going on for a while, but has the place where it's intersected with the press, the intelligence services, has this changed? So I want to get to how we're looking at something new now.
Well, before it was simply a liberal bias coming out of the CIA, but it was still pro-American. They still believed in American founding principles. They still believed in, Western moral tradition in one way or another, but they did it from the liberal side of the house in general. What you have today is a wokeness that's permeated the whole intelligence community, but especially the CIA and the FBI, where they no longer believe in these things. It's not a liberal versus conservative bias. It's a woke anti-American bias against everybody else. And it's not just a bias. It's an ideology that if you want to advance now in the FBI and the CIA, you have to subscribe to this. You have to be a, quote, ally of different identity groups throughout the FBI and the CIA. And this is coming from the different identity groups as they're organized in cells at the lower levels of the bureaucracies, all the way up to the leadership of them, where now if you want to get promoted in these agencies, you have to abide by DEI and all the other woke critical theory stuff in order to get promoted.
We're having a great conversation with Dr. J. Michael Waller. Mike Waller, his new book, Big Intel, how the FBI, the CIA and FBI went from Cold War heroes to deep state villains. And one of the things I want to ask Mike when we come back is how much of what happened to the CIA and FBI, how much of it happened, say, through the educational system? They're adopting all these woke ideas. And how much of it happened from foreign influence, from foreign infiltration of the U.S. intelligence community? If you're watching on YouTube, please join us when after we make the jump. We're going to Epoch TV exclusively. We'll be away for less than a minute, but please come back and make the jump. Having a great and important conversation with Mike Waller here. See you in a sec.
I think a big part of 1984 was that regular citizens were reporting other citizens for disobeying, for going against narrative, for speaking out. And we saw this in the United States. In a lot of what we thought were civilized free countries, where neighbors were calling the police if, for instance, there were more than 4 people, more than 6 people in your home. We were shifting by lockdowns the burden of the disease to the so-called essential workers crowd, which are the people working in the grocery stores, the people cleaning the toilets in the hospital, the people that are delivering for Amazon, while the affluent are sitting at home uninterrupted, right, for the most part, getting their full salary, working on their laptop. So there was this is unethical for public health guidance to shift the burden of a disease to poor people. They got away with it to a great extent because of the very effective use of censorship of opposing views and demonization of opposing views, so that this sort of propaganda, where it marginalized anyone who spoke against a narrative, became very effective. And that is a tactic that was actually used very, very much so in 1984. Orwell wrote the book at a time as a warning about the appeal of totalitarianism to elites and intellectuals at the time in the late 1940s.